Mariola and Alexandra for the excellent presentation of the report. And now we have the reaction to the report. I call on the stage Laura Noonan from Bloomberg, who will moderate the panel. And I'm calling also the people from the panel, Marie-Sophie Lappe, research analyst from Bruegel, Ines Scacchi, Director of Regulatory Affairs of the European Savings and Retail Banking Association, and Philippe Thill from the Cabinet of Commissioner Maria-Louise Albuquerque. Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. This might be the first event I have ever attended where we've actually been on the stage early. So that is a novel experience for me, and I'm definitely glad I got here on time. But I guess the financial planners, I shouldn't be surprised that you guys plan to be here on time, plan to keep it running on time. So we shall also try to keep on time. We have the report. I saw most of it and it was fascinating to hear. So I'd love to just get some perspectives initially from our esteemed guests about whether this reaffirmed what we already knew about financial literacy and financial health, or if anything surprised you or was different than what you expected. So I'm going to come to you first, Marie-Sophie, and we have another microphone there if you want to pass it down, Philippe. So was there anything in there from your time looking at this topic that struck you as surprising, unusual, new?
Yeah, let me maybe first start with the things that I think the report really iterates, that is also known in literature, is of course just the general, lack of financial literacy. There were some dire results here as well that make us all motivated to do something about it. Then things like the gender gap, just a big heterogeneity within Europe, different outcomes for different countries, of course. And also one big point I just want to reiterate is the low engagement in retirement savings, which is really a big blind spot that we all should worry and do something about. But maybe let me come to some of the things that I found new and important that I really think this report also highlights in a good way, which is first of all, this seeming mismatch between actual levels of financial literacy and the appetite to increase them. So there seems to be a lot of motivation and also the recognition of the importance of financial literacy amongst the general population, but it just doesn't really translate into results, it seems. So I think this willingness to learn is a big plus. The lack of it turning into action is still a big minus, where we need to understand where that mismatch comes from. So is it just a lack of accessibility? Is it a lack of resources? Or is it also maybe a lack of confidence? I mean, all of these things are usually also recognized in the literature, especially also this lack of confidence in women, for example. And linked to that, I also found one other result somewhat worrying, is this perception issue that for some people it really seems to be that financial health is only something for either the wealthy or the people who are already financially knowledgeable. So I think this also plays into this idea that there seems to be a lack of confidence. This also reinforces inequalities, of course. And yeah, so there's really this need to figure out whether there's an actual lack of resources, so if people really just don't have the financial space, or whether it's really just more of a perception that technically they could, but they don't know how to do so effectively. On a positive note, there also seems to be some level of self-assessed confidence in at least basic financial knowledge, which is great and which I think we also should build on. And taking this together, so kind of the idea of a lack of knowledge and also a lack of potential usability. So these hurdles that need to be overcome. So of course, one point is very important: financial education, of course. We're all aware, also somewhat aware of different strategies, what are important ones, starting early on in education, bringing it to the workplace, targeting specific groups and so on. But I think on top of that, we also need to improve usability in a way, or accessibility. And I think a lot of this would be done to just simplifying a lot of the complicated landscape that's currently out there. So looking for simpler products, better accessibility through technology as well. And yeah.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned the point about simplicity, because I think possibly part of the mismatch between people's claiming to want to be more financially literate, more financially healthy, and them getting there could actually be how difficult it is. And, you know, maybe not everybody wants to do as much work as it is now. I think that's something that we'll have to explore. And we're going to turn to you next, Ines. From the perspective of the savings banks who you represent, did the report resonate with you? And do you see areas in there where the savings banks can play a useful role in terms of maybe if this report were to be done again in, say, 5 years' time, in terms of improving some of those numbers?
Yes, good morning. First of all, let me congratulate for the study. As a panelist, I had the privilege to have the report well in advance. I spent a few days to study and read extensively, and it was really great. So I really recommend to everyone, even to understand our way to spend, to save, to approach to this issue. So many things really sounds familiar to us. First of all, let me say that it's not surprising that 78% of respondents say that they save only occasionally. This is raise broader concern about people spending and consuming habits, and which is something that sometimes is really disregarded when we talk about savings and investment union, for instance. And with respect to long-term savings, short-term savings, I was astonished to read in the report that 44% of the respondents say that they save for vacations. I mean, really, something is missing. The habits and the consumer. We live in a consumer society. So after saying that, I'm glad even to say that the report challenge a quite common narrative these days, that most of the Europeans are just savings are just sitting on the bank account. Indeed, the data show that more than 50% savings are in terms deposits, which provide a return. We can discuss if little or not, but a return. 22% in financial products, 13% in real estate, 10% in crypto activities, and 27% indeed in not interest-bearing accounts. And this give and provide us a comprehensive picture to reflect on. Then I was really depressing with regard to the pension. To me, it's astonished that in an aging society like Europe, pensions are the last knowledged and understood topic. I really encourage the Commission to work on it. And I was, even as a woman, I was really attached on the fact that even on the savings and in pension and financial education, yet there is a gender gap. So maybe the gender gap, even internally to our community of banks, we haven't reflected so far about this issue. Savings banks know as well, very well, their clients. We have branches, we engage with the advisor on the territories, on the communities, and I can say that the customer journey is too complex. And then other things.
If you just keep the mic just closer to your... Yeah.
Sorry. The customer journey is really complex. Even for simple products, when you talk with the clients and our banks do, even understanding a MiFID questionnaire, on sustainability issues is too complex, doesn't engage and discourage people to invest. Last point, which didn't come from the report though, taxation and administration burden matter. So taxation, according to what our branches say to us, taxation is the biggest concern, is the biggest worry and concern of the customer when they decide, if they decide to invest. Because if you are taxed on 30% of your capital gain, you run away.
Okay, and I guess maybe that's also a case for some financial issue. I mean, I appreciate there is an issue around tax, but also being taxed 30% of a 10% return is still better than getting 2% in a term deposit. So I guess that's also a financial education conversation.
Term deposit is simple from an administrative point of view. And they have a perception, because of course the average people, they don't reflect about inflation. They have a perception that there is no taxation and it's easy.
Okay, thank you for that. Philippe, first of all, thank you very much for heroically joining us and subbing in for Rika last night. I want you to bring you in for the Commission's perspective here, because the Commission, as everybody in this room knows, is very active on a number of these topics, your Commissioner in particular. So is there anything in this report that makes you think maybe some of the priorities need to shift, or does it more make you think that you're on the right track and these are highlighting gaps which the Commission was already working on proposals around?
Okay, maybe first let me start by thanking the authors of the report, because it's work and data points like this that are really important also for us in informing our work and in making sure that we really take the measures that are of interest to citizens and that resonate with them. And I want to say it's good timing to have this discussion today, because as we're speaking here, the college is currently debating two important initiatives. I think that go to the very core of the issues addressed in the report. First, the financial literacy strategy, and our recommendation on savings and investments accounts. I think I'll have a chance a bit later to go provide a bit more flesh on the bone. Of course, can't give all the spoilers because it's not formally adopted yet. And I think maybe let me start off by saying I was encouraged by two key data points that came out of this report. The first one is how important financial health is to the citizens and to the respondents. And second, also that there's a real willingness to improve and to learn, which shows, I think, that some of the actions that we're envisaging now go in the right direction and that we're actually catering to the demands of the people out there. Maybe just a word also on some of the key data points that you found and that resonate with what we've also observed. The first one being the relatively low level of emergency savings and the low resilience to important financial shocks. The second one being the relative lack of awareness and I may say preparedness for pensions. And the last one being the relatively high rates or the very high rates of savings still kept in either savings accounts or term deposits. These are things that we've also observed in preparing our initiatives, and we are taking the measures that we're taking now, and the package that will be adopted later today aims to address these very issues. And maybe to conclude with a few messages that came out of the report that we also want to highlight in our own work. The first one being the observed divergences, I think first between the member states and also between different demographic groups. To us, this confirms that there's room for the EU to step in and to do more to support the initiatives. And I think there's many very important and very good initiatives, both by public stakeholders and by private stakeholders, that are already going on. So we can have a supportive role there. And it also shows how important it is to tailor-make these initiatives to cater for the needs and the preferences and the specific situation of the different target groups. That brings me to the second point that we're also trying to address in our financial literacy strategy, really putting an emphasis on reaching people where they are and speaking to them in a manner that they can relate to with, for example, people that have a similar background that can really relate to their problems and convey the messages in a manner that very much speaks to the target audiences. And maybe the last and probably most important point, and also message that is very important to the Commissioner, that is that financial literacy is not just a preoccupation for people that have money to invest. It's much broader than investment literacy. It's really for everybody, and it's for everyday life decisions. It touches on things like budgeting, managing debt, even grocery shopping can involve important financial decisions. And we've seen that if there's targeted actions in this area and working with communities and people on these elements, you can have a real impact on people's life. And you can manage that people that weren't previously able to save at the end of the month, they will have some money left over, and they can put that either to their emergency savings or saving to other financial goals.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And so I guess one of the things that struck me from the report is that financial literacy does encompass many, many different things. And I guess one of the issues we talk about is, and we'll talk a little later, is how to prioritize the many things. And it also means different things to different people. The retail investment strategy, I know the Commission has put a lot of focus on that because it matters both from a financial health perspective, but also from an economic contribution perspective. So it has multi-layers to it. But when we think about how key is the retail investment piece, Marie-Sophie, I'm going to come to you first. When you think about financial health as a whole, how key is it to get people habitually investing money in something other than leaving it on deposit in a bank?
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up, mainly because, this links a lot to the retirement discussion that we've already started, that it's just really key importance for long-term financial health as well. And I think it also really plays into the security aspect that was also mentioned, that money is associated with security. And if we think about, this is also, we had a discussion at the dinner yesterday, but as a person who knows that my, let's say, Pillar 1 pension or my public pension is far from being secure, I know that my financial future might be less secure than that of other people, than that of my parents or my grandparents. So for me, this is also just a question of how sure can people be about their future and their financial future. And retail investment here, I think, is a key part, mainly because it is the key lever, basically, on how to make our money work for us. And especially for young people, the earlier you start, the better it is. And so I think it's really key getting people engaged and to get people to actively invest. And on top of that, of course, to get them invested in something that's not just a low yield bank account, but also to diversify in that way.
Okay, we are going to come to the pensions conversation in a second, but Ines, I saw your eyebrows raise at the concept of a low yield bank account not being a good thing to put your money into. So Marie-Sophie, if you want to pass the microphone over there, and maybe you can give us your perspective on how you consider the retail investment strategy as part of the holistic drive towards better financial health.
Okay, let me clarify very clearly and firmly that as a savings banks, we fully support financial education, financial literacy, financial health. It's part of our DNA. But savings banks since long are engaged in their communities on these efforts. So instead of waiting for a top-down approach, we already are there, and with many, many good examples. Of course, much more need to be done because the issue of financial literacy is, there are millions of good initiatives, good practices, but the scaling up effect is missing. So we welcome your holistic strategy. We are really in favor. Just a few examples of what the savings banks do in their territories. Swedbank in Sweden reach more than 100,000 students a year with the Young Economy program. The German Savings Bank Association has started since more than 30 years ago, the European Stock Market Learning, which is a competition in a stock market simulation in which students compete to invest a portfolio These engage more than 130,000 students per year. In Italy, they run the same exercise. In Luxembourg's podcast, does a nice things, a Twiz club with actors and with theater. They teach since the pupil in school in a funny way some basic financial concepts. In Vienna, Erste Group runs the Financial Life Park, a park in Vienna dedicated to this, even online to reach. But we are not just engaged for youth and students, we are really care about adults and senior citizens as well. I mentioned just two good practices. In France, Finance et Pédagogie, which is part of a PPSE group, provide adult learning activities in partnership with public authority. So the importance of public-private
there are lots of educational initiatives going on.
And yes, in Kesha, in Spain, for instance, Kesha runs a Futuro program, which is exactly on a planning for retirement, for pension, and for financial independence in the later life. And they run this program even for small and medium enterprise, because we forgot that small and medium enterprise are retail clients.
This is true as well. Philippe, I'm going to bring you in now. Just we have one audience question, which I will come to next. I should have said audience questions can be made through that chat if you're online. If you're in the room and you have a question, raise your hand and I'll try and get a microphone to you. Philippe, what I wanted to ask you was, we were discussing last week at Eurofi, and I think some of your people were there as well, whether the lack of retail investment is because of a lack of access to products, like people can't access them, or it's because of a lack of willingness or a lack of awareness. Because some people express concern that the Commission was spending a lot of time on the practicalities of setting up a product, when in fact, in many countries, people actually can invest. They can go on an app and they can do retail investments. They just choose not to. So what do you think the issue is? Is it access, or is it more of a mindset issue?
No, thanks. I think that's a very important question, of course, because when we were discussing which initiatives to get into this was one of the questions that came up. And I think the Commission has also publicly said she does not believe that European retail investors are fundamentally different first among each other. So you can see there's different levels of investment in different member states. And you can see there's a very high level of participation in some member states. She does not believe that it's a fundamental difference in nature, but it's more about giving the right incentives to people. And I think that's where we come in with the package that will be for adoption today, working on both angles. First, working on the financial literacy, raising awareness, spreading the knowledge, giving investors or retail investors the tools to confidently navigate this space, but also working on accessibility, because it's true that you may have the ability to open an account on an app at least in some member states. There's really good initiatives already out there. But the truth is also, it still remains a very daunting task to invest, because there's the complexity around it, be it the tax treatment, be it the regulatory obligations to comply with. There's also the fact of taking the leap and taking some risk. And I believe if you are with a bank advisor and you're talking about placing your money somewhere, and you hear about the fact that you may potentially lose that money, that creates a barrier as well, in a sense. So it is about raising awareness about that. It's also about making it easier for people to take that leap, and that's where our recommendation on the savings and investments accounts comes in, which is really focused on usability and flexibility. So having a seamless process, making sure that citizens are not locked in, also working on increasing competition in the market, so with the objective of bringing down the fees and fostering innovation. And I think the taxation question is obviously a very important one, both from a compliance perspective. It can be very complicated to understand what the tax consequences are. The rules are very, very different in different member states and for different products. And also from an incentive side, of course, this is a very powerful lever. If you know that if you do the leap, you will not necessarily be taxed at the full rate if ever that investment produces a return. So that's something that member states can consider when trying to promote it. We've seen that there's a number of member states and also countries beyond the EU that have done this, that have shown that it can really work in increasing retail investor participation. So we've looked at those examples. We've tried to identify what works best. What are the factors that really explain why some accounts have been taken up and others may have had a bit less success? And we're putting these as at the disposal of member states in a sort of blueprint, so that for those member states that don't have these tools yet, they can take inspiration. And for those that already have them but may not entirely be satisfied with the take-up, they can use this also to review their national systems and see what tweaks they may be able to make to change that.
Thank you. So on the topic of the things that also prevent people from doing it, that the audience question we have is about one of those aspects, and the audience member is asking, is it true that the customer is discouraged by MiFID obligations, but it's our job, I guess, as financial planners, to make them understand why it is important? Why think that taxation is the biggest thought, I guess we mean obstacle? Is it up to the consultant? It's up to the consultant in the planning field to do an upstream job in order to make sure to make the customer achieve the objectives by advising him in the best possible way. So I guess the underlying question is, first of all, MiFID obligations, are they a discouragement? And is that something which a financial planner should be able to help a client to overcome? And then the second point around taxation and why is that such a big hurdle? Marie-Sophie, I'm going to bring you in here on either point. You can pick whichever one of those appeals to you. And then I'll turn to Ines on the other one. You've drawn the short straw here.
Yeah, let's maybe, since I am not a financial advisor, maybe talk about the taxation issue as a potential hurdle. I think there is multiple dimensions to this. The first one being is that it is daunting. At least I'm from Germany. The tax system in Germany is insanely complicated, and I'm sure that many other EU citizens feel the same. There's really just a daunting task to have to worry about whether your tax is deducted correctly, whether you can maybe get money back, but you don't know how. So I think this just comes on top of the fact that you need to make really complicated financial decisions. I mean, products are not accessible to the average person. So I think I see it definitely as a hurdle. Whether it's the biggest one, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, that also depends on the person and how they view things. But I guess the entry point is usually the more worrying one, and then taxation comes a little bit after. But I'm sure that financial advisors can also provide support in that. So
you definitely know your audience. Philippe, I'm going to bring you in on the taxation point shortly. But first off, Ines, the MiFID concerns, is that something that can be overcome?
Yes. If I may, of course, our advisor need to and go through a long journey with the clients. The MiFID framework is complex, and after a while, when you remain on the surface, when you remain on the biggest topic, the customer follows you, is engaged. But after a while, when you go through too detailed choices, option, explanation, the customer loses his patience. It's like us, to be honest with us. Do you read a contract? Do you read 20 pages of small characters? We know that we need to do something. We sign a contract without even read the contract or the information. The issue is that we need to pose the question, wouldn't be too much? Would it be better to simplify? And our role yet is to explain, but rules change continuously. So in order to build up some kind of experience, competence, rules need to be remain stable. In MiFID, we assist continuously on changing, adding. So the customer, even though the advisor, the private advisor, the banks do their best, are simply discouraged. It's too much.
Okay, thank you. Philippe, what I wanted to ask you about was when I read that the Commission is trying to do something around taxation, What it reminded me of from a practical perspective is banking union when they were trying to do the European Deposit Insurance Guarantee Scheme. This stuff is really difficult to achieve. And does it run the risk that we get stuck? Like we've been in conversations about EGIS for probably a decade. Does it run the risk that everything gets tied up in taxation and it's impossible to reconcile and that then blocks progress?
No, thanks. I think that's a very legitimate question. Of course, taxation is always a sensitive topic also for the member states. There's also limited measures that we can take in that domain. But I do think the approach that we've taken is the right one. We've looked at what is out there in terms of best practices. So these are measures that are already implemented by some member states or by some third countries in certain cases. And we're putting that at disposal of the member states. I do think there's a very high level commitment by the member states for implementing the necessary measures to develop our capital markets. So we want to work in giving them the tools to do so. And I do think what we're trying to do, and you'll see it later today, is really be sufficiently, let's say, open to accommodate the differences in national taxation systems, because that can often be a question. If we will go forward and encourage member states to do something that doesn't fit well with the way their system is set up, then of course that's a very difficult thing to do. But if we can work with them in designing a model that fits with their existing rules, that makes it a lot easier. And I would say that there's a lot of different ways of going about it. There's the complexity question in terms of just making compliance easier, working potentially with providers to do this work for the investors so that they don't have to worry about calculating capital gains, what is the different tax treatment to dividends, to interest payments that they're getting. And on the other hand, of course, taxation is also a very powerful economic lever, and the way you design the taxation system will steer behavior, and it's intended to steer behavior. So it has to be part of the conversation. And by giving an advantage to some products and not others, you direct the investor or the citizen investing their money to certain of these products. And that's a reality, and that's something that the member states need to acknowledge.
Thank you. So I want to bring you in here, Marie-Sophie, on a slightly different topic. So we've been talking a lot, and a lot of the conversation I've seen around savings and investment union has been around promoting good. But the other side of the coin is trying to prevent harm. So one of the things we were talking about last night as well is the buy now, pay later culture, which we've had a lot of in the UK, and the extent to which a situation where you haven't even got to save for your first tennis racket because you can just pay for your €50 tennis racket over 4 installments, the extent to which that discourages young people in particular for developing the habit of saving, and how that can have a bigger impact later. So Marie-Sophie, I'll bring you in here just to get, you're probably also the youngest person I think on this panel and possibly in this room, the perspective on if the buy now, pay later culture of instant gratification, you could have it, you don't need to save for anything, will change how a generation thinks about savings.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I think that the just accessibility of, in this case, I guess some degree of debt through digital tools is a risk. And also with the lack of overview that a lot of young people have, I mean, that is a big problem that drives these accumulated micro debts in a way, is certainly a risk. And it needs to be, I mean, here I'm just repeating a lot of things, can be tackled probably most effectively by financial literacy, but also by giving young people the tools to get a good overview of what they're spending, how they're spending things, potentially even talking about, I mean, depending on what age we're looking at, restrictions to protect young people from such things. But I think so, even though these digital tools and this accessibility has risks, it can also have benefits in just getting young people to save more in different ways. So that you think about, there's a recently just a lot of fintechs, for example, using these micro savings in a way that if you spend just a small percentage of your spending gets set aside. So these kind of digital products can then, on the other hand, also show opportunities. So I think the balancing between the risk and the opportunities here is really important. And the underlying ground of this to make this accessible and usable for young people is also just education and accessibility in terms of the risks and understanding them.
Thank you. So Ines, I'm going to bring you in here, and then I think we got our first audience question, which is very exciting. So Ines, what's your perspective on whether the buy now, pay later culture is a challenge for trying to also build a savings culture?
To be honest with you, we don't encourage this kind of methodology. Buy now, pay later. Absolutely, it's something that doesn't really give the perception of being in trouble, and will end up to be in trouble. We have the experience of the Nordics, for instance, especially the young in the Nordics. So this kind of schemes, method of payments, maybe we need, but in Europe we have a robust framework on that. So I encourage to be even bolder on this. Over in-depthness is an issue because we are, I said at the very beginning, we are a consumer society. So we need to pay particularly attention to the youth on this.
Okay, thank you. So the gentleman at the front there, I think, had a remark. Do we have a roving microphone, or will we give him one of ours? I think we're going to pass the microphone. And if you wouldn't mind briefly introducing yourself, that would be great. Thank you.
Roger Hartmann. I'm the chairman of EFPA in Luxembourg and an observer of the financial industry over the last 42 years. I like this report. It didn't bring new light because all this was extremely clear in my mind. The great thing is to have it black and white and to have it documented and to have it in an academic approach, that we have now something to show what we all knew. And this is an enormous advantage. I am concerned. I was concerned. I am concerned. I'm even anxious. And my point was to show, to demonstrate some new trends which are appearing in the markets of banks. In Luxembourg, a Dutch bank decided to kick out thousands of clients who are small. And small is a family with a total amount below 50,000 euro. This is small. Please go away. We don't want you anymore. We concentrate on core affluent and wealth management. These poor refugees found place within the state bank, mainly, a little bit at Raiffeisen, a mutual bank, and in some other places. As I'm very much connected to all these banks, I said, why do you take these refugees? And they said, look, having a bank account is a fundamental right in Europe, and we have to accept these refugees. Do we like these refugees? The answer is no. Do we want really to advise these refugees? No, but they have the fundamental right to have a bank account. My question, when I hear all this and I look at your dreams, I had a dream to have clients having good advice, even though they are not millionaires. That's something very ambitious. I still have doubts it will happen one day because banks are amazingly looking at their profitability. I see more the emergence of new Revoluts, which exist in France, in Germany, in other places. And banks will slowly be replaced by the Revoluts of the new world. So the whole thing is somewhere shifting. And we, as a EFPA, we have to look and observe at this shifting because we used to work a lot with banks, and we should probably look at neobanks, we should look at fintechs, we should look at this, all what is emerging, and the whole paradigm is changing. This was what I wanted to bring in the discussion.
Thank you so much. And Philippe, I'm going to bring you in there just on the idea of access to advice, access to, I guess banks are commercial entities, so they are allowed to offboard a client segment they don't like. So how do you consider that from a policy perspective?
No, thank you very much. I do think I won't comment on individual commercial decisions, obviously, but I do think in general, this shows a bit the thinking behind the savings and investments account as well, which we purposefully want to be open even to individuals who only have a very limited contribution to make, because even that limited contribution can make a difference in their life. And we do see this as a tool to foster competition and to potentially have both incumbents and new entrants reconsider whether this may be an opportunity that they want to explore and develop their activities in the space. So we do think it can really be a catalyst. Now, of course, it depends on whether the frameworks will be implemented by the member states.
So yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you just on that, on the member states, is how much of what the Commission is doing in this area depends on the member states willing, and like, will it be implemented in a patchwork of ways across the member states who are embracing it and the member states that aren't? And how much can the Commission do to ensure some kind of level implementation across many member states with different starting points and different objectives?
I think that's the crucial point that we have different starting points. So I think there's some member states out there who really have well-functioning examples. There's the other member states who have only recently introduced such frameworks. So we'll need probably a bit more experience to know how successful they'll be. But in the end, we were very conscious of that, and we also understand that we need to cater for the national context and the existing frameworks and rules, including around taxation. So there's probably no one size fits all to this, and it will be up to individual member states to implement it. Of course, we take this recommendation first to highlight what we deem best practices in these areas, and we will continue to engage with member states in ensuring the take-up and the rollout.
Thank you, Ines. I think you wanted to come in on that point, or possibly the previous point.
I would like, thank you for raising this point. We are savings, we are local rooted, and the key is diversification and diversity of the banking sector. We cannot really coexist and exist with a model in which there will be just one model of doing banking. We need a big bank, we need investment banks yet, but we still need territories and local cooperative mutual savings retail in order to guarantee all the necessary, not only financial education, but financial inclusion. I really concur on you, and thank you for having brought this issue here.
Thank you so much, Marie-Sophie. I wanted to come to you because I did promise I would come back to you on pensions, and it has been about half an hour and I haven't come back to you yet on pensions. So on the pensions topic, that's another place where countries have different starting points, but also possibly different intended destinations, given that in some countries, it's not actually anticipated that the elderly can be self-sufficient. The elderly are part of a multi-generational family group, and the objective isn't that you can run your own P&L at 90, it's that you live with your children and you're taken care of. So how do you think about trying to improve retirement outcomes across such a diverse group of countries?
Yeah, so I think even though the cultures around retirement planning and savings and so on are different across countries, I think one important part is all European countries face severe demographic change, and some of these systems need to be reconsidered because it might not be feasible anymore for children to fully take care of their parents if there is more and more, let me say, more and more parents and less children, right? So if you think of this from a broader economic perspective, we really need to leverage financial investment here, because it's just not going to cut it anymore to rely on your family. I mean, it's also going to be a burden on the children, but it's also going to be difficult for the parents. So, but what I do think is important, and I think that was also an insight from the report, is that financial planning and money And everything around it is also very emotional. It sparks emotional responses in people. So I think policies that aim to encourage retirement planning, whether it's auto-enrollment or whether it's through different vehicles, really needs to cater also to the people that it's supposed to be for. And it's needs to be communicated in a way that takes away fears from people. It needs to be communicated in a way that people feel like they are included, and that it fits their own cultural and social norms. So I think since we have such a diverse field across different EU member states, I think it's also really important for those member states to have flexibility in how they want to implement recommendations by the Commission, which I think are also important to have common recommendations, of course, to bring a lot of member states to the same level, but how they get to that same level might mean something different for every single one.
Thank you. So Philippe, I want to bring you in here because sometimes I feel as if there is a social contract in Europe that you will be taken care of, that things will be okay. So is pensions almost a game of chicken? And is that a bit of an opposition to what the Commission's trying to do? Because if you don't fully fund your pension, in most European countries, the expectation is the state will take care of you. And if that leads to massive increased public spending in 20, 30, 40 years' time, I think people think that will happen. Like in Europe, I lived in the US for a time, and the expectation there was if you didn't look after yourself, you'd be on the street when you were 75. In Europe, that's not how the society works. So do people think that if they just do nothing, the state, Big Brother or something will come in and take care of them?
Well, I think as for the Commissioner of Pensions is a really important topic, and we have taken a habit of traveling to the member states to get first-hand feedback on the concerns of stakeholders. And what she's trying to do in that context is to talk to a variety of stakeholders, and we get a first-hand feeling of how sensitive the topic of pension and how emotional and heated the debates around pensions can be. So I think from our perspective, of course, the way pension systems are set up is the prerogative of the member states. What we are focusing on is working with different stakeholders to raise awareness, to communicate on the importance of this topic. And financial literacy is, of course, this is an important component of financial literacy work. And what we can also do is offer opportunities on the educative front in developing pension tracking systems, also in putting products at the disposal of retail savers that will be an attractive alternative for them to look into. And that's why we announced in the Savings and Investment Union strategy office that we're going to look at the regulatory framework of some of these products, be it the PEP or be it IROPS, to assess what hasn't worked so far and how we can really increase the appetite for take-up of these types of products. But it is an incremental exercise and a progressive exercise.
Thank you. So we have time. I'm going to check first if anyone else in the room has any comments or observations that they would like to share. Yeah, we got another gentleman in a suit. If we could get the mic back to you, sir. Thank you so much, Ines. Sorry, we've got a bit of a mic shortage going on.
Thank you. I would like to pose a question for Philippe related to the upcoming recommendation of the EU Commission on the Savings and Investment Account, a new financial instrument which is aimed to foster the movement from retail investment savings to different financial instruments to invest in the capital markets. The question is that this new financial instrument is recommended for the EU members to be regulated with tax incentives. But as you know, since the harmonization of direct taxation within the European Union is not existing and it's not expected, I am afraid that we are going to enter into a scenario with 27 different savings and investment accounts with 27 different tax treatments. So the question is, don't you think that we have a problem with a possible breach of the free movement of capitals and the free provision of financial services within the single market with this possible scenario? And the question is, did the Commission at any time consider the possibility to propose a different legal instrument compulsory for the EU members instead of a recommendation and maybe an EU directive?
Yes, I think these are very interesting questions and very important questions that of course we've assessed before deciding on the appropriate way forward. I think on the choice of legal instrument, the reason why we've opted for a recommendation is twofold. First, because there's already many very successful examples out there, and we did, of course, not want to interfere with them or trigger changes that may diminish their success. And also because of the urgency, because if we start a legislative negotiation process at this stage, it's going to take a while for that to be agreed and rolled out. And we do think there's a joint sentiment of urgency on taking the measures quickly. And in our view, that's why the most effective way forward was to identify what has worked well and then leave it to the member states to implement those. The truth is also that tax systems are very different in the member states, and we need to cater for that. And that is why we've been very careful in phrasing the recommendation in this manner. Of course, any measures that member states introduce will always be under conditions that they respect the free movement of capital. But I do not immediately see if the tax rate is a different one, or if the way you give the tax advantage is a different one, how that would necessarily impede the free flow of capital in Europe. You would hold the instrument in an account, you would get a tax incentive for that, and that depends on your member state of residence, which is also the one where you would be paying your taxes.
Thank you. So we are coming up close to coffee break time, and I have one final question for all of the panelists. And that is, and I'm going to ask you to answer this in 1 minute or less ideally, what does success in financial literacy and the Savings Investment Union look like to you? If we're sitting here in 5 years' time, how will we know that we've worked and it's done a good job? Marie-Sophie, I'll come to you first. I'll just give you this mic.
Yeah, I'm going to be super short on this. I think there's a few points. I think one big one that I personally find very important is closing the gender gap in it. The next one is closing the income gap. So basically making sure that lower income people catch up to those that already have higher incomes and already save. So basically it's about closing gaps here. And of course, closing the retirement gap as good as possible across all different demographics.
I would say that I pretty much am aligned, but in 5 years from now, I hope we will gather again and we'll talk on a practical way without a lot of ideologism, and to maybe have a more volume to comment on.
Thank you. Philippe.
I do think we at the beginning of a journey here. And we have announced a comprehensive set of actions that we believe will show real differences on the ground. It is about empowering. It is about giving people opportunities and giving them the tools to make the right decisions. And I would also share the hope that by the end of, or at least by the midterm review, we'll already see some progress that we can be proud of and that can inform the next steps in our initiatives.
Thank you so much. So we're at the beginning of the journey, but we are at the end of the panel, and we are at the end of this morning's panels. So I think hopefully the tea and coffee and biscuits or whatever is ready by now. So with that, I will thank you for being such an attentive audience, for your questions, comments and remarks, and much thanks to my panelists for all of their contributions. Thank you.